If we take a look at American history, we'll notice something curious. There was a time when the Spanish stopped pushing northward, and the French gave up moving west, leaving Louisiana behind. The reason for this pause? The Comanches. The Comanches, originally part of the Shoshone tribe, lived as hunters and gatherers in the vast region of the Great Basin in the western United States. Up until the late 17th century, they maintained this traditional way of life. But when they got their hands on horses, everything changed. This transformation was so profound that they quickly became one of the most formidable forces in America. Mounted on horseback, the Comanches dominated the plains and resisted European and later American expansion. For about 40 years, their strength and strategy kept the U.S. government from gaining full control over Texas and nearby regions. The impact of the Comanches was so significant that it reshaped the pace of colonization and altered the course of American expansion. They left the mountains they shared with their Shoshone neighbors and moved to the vast plains of eastern Colorado and western Kansas. This shift was more than just geographic. It was cultural and strategic. Once they reached the Great Plains, they headed south and found an environment seemingly tailor-made for their needs. Mild weather, abundant buffalo herds, and a sizable population of Mustang horses. In this new territory, the Comanches quickly adapted and thrived. They traded weapons and ammunition with the French and also built trade relations with the Wichita tribe along the Red River. Despite these connections, they faced constant threats from tribes to the north and east, like the Blackfoot and Crow, who were better armed. With their horseback skills and deep knowledge of the land, the Comanches claimed a vast expanse of the southern plains, covering much of Texas. This area became known as the Comancheria, their stronghold and a symbol of their power. Interestingly, the name Comanche comes from a Ute word meaning enemy, or more literally, someone who always wants to fight me. However, among themselves, they preferred to call themselves Nemina, meaning the people. The Comanches were a fascinating society, organized into small, independent groups made up of families. A unique aspect of their culture was that when a man got married, he would leave his family to join his wife's, strengthening the bonds between different bands. For the Comanches, buffalo were far more than just a food source. They provided leather for clothing, materials for shelters, and held a central place in their culture. However, what truly transformed their way of life was the horse. With horses, the Comanches gained incredible mobility, allowing them to follow buffalo herds and giving them an edge in both hunting and warfare. Beyond that, horses became a symbol of status and wealth, as well as one of the most valuable items in trade. The Comanches' skill in horseback riding was legendary. Children learned to ride at a young age, mastering techniques so impressive that even other tribes admired them. Politically, the Comanches were an egalitarian society. Each group had leaders for both peace and war, but real power usually rested with the civil chief, who was chosen by the consensus of the group. Starting in the early 18th century, the Comanches moved into Texas, where their arrival created tensions with the indigenous tribes already living there, like the Apaches. This conflict ended with the Comanches emerging victorious, pushing the Apaches further south. In 1758, in a dramatic event, about 2,000 Comanches, allied with other tribes, attacked and destroyed a Spanish mission on the San Saba River that had been built for the Apaches. The attack left 8 people dead, including 2 priests, and showcased the military strength of the Comanches. The Spanish attempted retaliation, led by Colonel Diego Ortiz Parilla, but they suffered a defeat at the Red River in 1759. This setback forced the Spanish to take a more diplomatic approach, offering peace treaties, although the Apaches remained a lingering concern. Some of these agreements were honored while others fell through. In 1785, the Spanish decided to negotiate directly in Comancheria, offering gifts and promises to establish peace. During this period, the Comanche population was estimated to range between 20,000 and 40,000 people. As Spanish control weakened in the early 19th century, they could no longer deliver the gifts and goods they had promised the Comanches, reigniting conflicts. The Comanches resumed their raids on Spanish territory, stealing horses and other resources. These stolen goods were sold to American traders who had begun entering Texas. bringing in return weapons, ammunition, and goods that further empowered the Comanches. This created a lucrative trade between the two groups, with stolen horses being highly prized by buyers in the United States. In 1821, Mexico declared independence from Spain, but this political shift had little impact on Comancheria. The new Mexican government tried to curb the Comanches' power by encouraging tribes like the Shawnees and Cherokees to fight against them. Additionally, Mexico's 1824 colonization law opened the door for foreign immigration to Texas, attracting a growing number of American settlers. What had once been a profitable trading relationship quickly began to break down, as settlers encroached on lands the Comanches considered sacred and vital to their way of life, turning former trading partners into new enemies. In the 19th century, when Texas declared its independence from Mexico in 1836, it found itself in a region still dominated by the Comanches and their allies, who controlled the vast Texas plains. The Comanches were notorious for their frequent raids on frontier settlements. During one of these raids, a 9-year-old girl was kidnapped and eventually became fully integrated into Comanche culture. Years later, it was revealed that she was the mother of Quanah Parker, one of the most famous Comanche chiefs. Sam Houston, elected as the first president of the newly formed Republic of Texas, advocated for a peaceful approach to relations with indigenous peoples. However, he faced resistance from the Texas Congress, which rejected the idea of establishing a clear border between Texas and Comancheria, a condition the Comanches required for peace. This refusal led to the abandonment of Houston's proposed peace policy. His successor, Mirabeau B. Lamar, took an opposite stance, favoring armed confrontation with the Comanches. This militaristic policy led to the tragic Council House fight of 1840 in San Antonio. During what was supposed to be a peaceful meeting, tensions escalated when Texas officials attempted to arrest the Comanche leaders present. The incident ended with 35 Comanches killed, including 12 tribal leaders, and 30 more, mostly women and children, taken captive. 7 Texans were also killed, and 8 were injured. In retaliation for this act of aggression, the Comanches launched a massive raid a few months later, marking one of the darkest and most violent episodes in the history of Texas frontier conflicts. In the 19th century, under the leadership of Buffalo Hump, around 500 Comanche warriors swept through southern Texas, attacking the towns of Victoria and Linville. They killed 25 people, burned buildings, and looted settlements along the way. On their way back north, they encountered resistance at Plum Creek, where the Texas Rangers confronted them. In this battle, the Rangers secured a significant victory, losing 11 men while Comanche casualties were uncertain, with 12 bodies recovered by the Rangers. Later in October, a Texan offensive destroyed a Comanche camp near what is now the city of Colorado. The Comanches were forced to retreat beyond the Red River. While the Texans succeeded in pushing the Comanches out of their borders, the conflict took a heavy toll on both sides. By this time, Sam Houston had returned to the presidency and was attempting to reinstate his peace policy with the native peoples. Unfortunately, despite his efforts, lasting peace was never achieved. Texas became part of the United States in 1845, marking the beginning of American oversight of indigenous affairs in the region. In 1854, in an effort to ensure peaceful coexistence between settlers and native peoples, the government established 2 Indian reservations in the state. Around 350 Comanches, already weakened by conflicts, epidemics, and a dwindling buffalo population, settled in these areas. However, other Comanche groups continued to roam freely across the plains. During the Civil War, with border security weakened, raids into settled lands increased. After the war, the U.S. government re-established stronger frontier defenses and resumed negotiating treaties with the Plains tribes. These treaties aimed to facilitate settler expansion while confining Native Americans to reservations. The Treaty of Medicine Lodge Creek, signed in 1867, designated a large area in the southwestern part of Indian Territory for the Comanches, Kiowas, and Kiowa Apaches, located between the Washita and Red Rivers. This marked a significant moment in U.S. Indian policy. As the Comanches faced the threat of losing their culture and way of life, they turned to strong leaders to guide their resistance. At the heart of this struggle was a young medicine man, White Eagle, who, in the spring of 1874, rallied his people with promises of victory over the white settlers. Another key figure was Quanah Parker, an influential war chief who, alongside White Eagle, inspired warriors to fight for the preservation of their traditions. In a desperate and courageous act, the Comanches, along with their Kiowa and Cheyenne allies, confronted buffalo hunters taking refuge in an abandoned fort at Adobe Walls in Hutchinson County. These hunters were targeting buffalo primarily for their valuable hides. Despite the natives' superior numbers, the battle did not go in their favor. The hunters, protected by the fort and equipped with long-range rifles, successfully repelled the attack. The defeat at Adobe Walls dealt a devastating blow to the natives' morale, shaking their belief in the possibility of successful resistance. Furthermore, this loss triggered a harsh response from the U.S. government, which later that year launched the Red River War. This campaign aimed to subdue the native tribes and force them onto reservations, marking a relentless period of aggression against indigenous freedom and culture. In a surprise attack led by Colonel Ronald S. McKenzie at Palo Duro Canyon, a Comanche camp was devastated, and their horse herds were destroyed. While there were few casualties, the loss of their essential resources made survival on the plains through the winter impossible, forcing the Comanches to submit to life on reservations. Quanah Parker and his group were the last Comanches to live freely on the Texas plains, holding out for nearly a year before surrendering. By 1875, the Comanche population, once numbering in the tens of thousands, had dwindled to just 1,600 people. That year, they were relocated to the Fort Sill Reservation, where they joined the Kiowas and Apaches. Adapting to reservation life was a harsh challenge. The Comanches faced pressure to abandon their traditions of hunting and warfare in favor of farming and ranching, as they were encouraged to adopt Western customs. This cultural and lifestyle pressure persisted until 1901, when the reservation was divided under the Jerome Agreement, an accord between the Kiowa, Comanche, Apache tribes, and the U.S. government. In the 19th century, a significant agreement was reached between the U.S. federal government and the Comanche Nation. Under this agreement, every individual, regardless of age or gender, was granted 160 acres of land for personal use, while additional areas were set aside for churches, government agencies, and schools. In return, the Comanches relinquished ownership of most of their ancestral lands, retaining only 4 areas totaling over 500,000 acres. They also accepted $2 million in compensation for the ceded land. Despite objections from Comanche leaders who had several concerns about the terms of the agreement, the government enforced its decision. Lands not designated for the Comanches were opened for public settlement, and white settlers quickly outnumbered the native population in the area. Over time, many Comanches moved to other regions in search of new work opportunities. During World War II, the Comanches once again played a prominent role, with several members serving in the military and defense industries. They were particularly notable as code talkers, using their native language to create communication codes that German adversaries couldn't break. 17 Comanches served in this critical capacity. In the decades that followed, especially during the 1960s, a resurgence of indigenous pride and nationalism inspired the Comanches to come together to restructure their community. These efforts led to the establishment of a self-governing tribal government headquartered near Lawton, Oklahoma. Today, the Comanche Nation is a vibrant and active community with approximately 16,000 members, nearly 8,000 of whom live in southwestern Oklahoma.